So I've been working with Django for quite a while now, and one of the tools that I've consistently implemented into my projects is Docker. This is like many other developers that use Docker, and there's many reasons why you'd want to use it. So hopefully in this video, you'll be convinced on why you should set up Docker for your project. But if you're new to Docker, or you're new to just setting it up in a Django project, then this video might be useful to you. Basically, what I wanted to do is just show you how you can set up Docker really quickly using an existing project, which is Cookiecutter Django, and we're going to get into that. But basically, I thought I would make a video on how you can set up Docker in an existing Django project and actually understand enough of the Docker configuration to really know what's going on and how to configure it or change it slightly in the future. Plus, you'll come out the other side with all the benefits of actually Dockerizing the Django project. So, as I said, we're going to be using Cookiecutter Django, and if you're not familiar with this, Cookiecutter is basically a tool that you can use to bootstrap projects using these cookie cutters, which are like templates, and Cookiecutter Django is a specific template that you can use to bootstrap a Django project, and it comes with a lot of things installed for you. You can configure it for Docker, and you can add the Django REST framework, you can add Celery. So it's really comprehensive, and I really like this tool, so a lot of credit needs to go to it. And if you haven't used it before, I do highly recommend just starting to use this project because it implements a lot of best practices and it just standardizes your workflow. So you get a lot quicker and a lot better at making projects with Django. So I'm going to show you how we can use this project if you have an existing project and really just understand the Docker configuration that this project provides you. So with that said, let's get started. Now, if you prefer reading, then you can go to justdjango.com, and on our blog, we've got how to Dockerize Django in 5 minutes, where you can read everything that I'm going to talk about in this video. So if you prefer reading, you can come over here. And with that said, we can get started with the video. So to get started, you're going to need to download Docker. So you can head to docker.com and you can go to products, Docker desktop, and then download for your operating system. This is a pretty big download, so it'll take a while if you don't have it installed already. But once you've got this downloaded, you'll then be ready to go for this tutorial because you will need it. And the second thing is Cookiecutter and Cookiecutter Django. Now, all the links will be in the description of this video, but Cookiecutter Django is the template, whereas you're also going to need Cookiecutter itself installed. And basically you can come, if you scroll down in the docs here, powered by Cookiecutter. If we open this up, you can see here it's also another GitHub repository, and all you need to do is just install this as a Python dependency. So you just pip install Cookiecutter and you'll have it installed and ready to go. And that means you can use Cookiecutter Django, but you can also use all the other Cookiecutter templates, because once you have Cookiecutter installed, that's really all you need. So I'm going to open up VS Code, and I'm just going to open up a terminal here. So again, to start off, you're going to need to make sure that you install Cookiecutter. This is the first package that you need. So I'm going to use pip3. And that's already installed, right? So we don't need to worry about that. And now I can use Cookiecutter by running Cookiecutter in the terminal and then just giving it some arguments to create the project. So we'll be using Cookiecutter Django, but before I actually dive into this, I'm going to create a Django project using the standard Django admin start project command, and that's going to play the role of our existing project. So we've got a Django project, we've been working with it for however long, and now we've decided that we want to Dockerize it. So what I'm going to do is first I'll change into the correct folder so that we can actually store everything. And so inside this project folder, I'm going to make a directory which we'll call let's say our current project. So this is going to act like the existing project. And inside here, I'm going to start with a virtual environment just called env. Once you have that, we'll then go and activate it. and we can then go install Django. Right, so the latest version right now, 3.2.5, and we can then use the Django admin start project command, and we'll just call it, let's go with current project. I'll also put a dot at the end so that it's created inside that folder. And I'm just going to go and open this up in VS Code. Right, so we've got current project, which has current project there, virtual environment. Right, so current project just has the standard Django files that we get given when we create a project. So settings, ASGI, URLs, etc. And so what I'll do is I'll need to reactivate this. So let me just get to the right place. And I'm going to do the initial things, run the migrate command, and run the runserver. Right, so we have the project running, and there it is. Okay, so this is our existing project. Now we could go and do whatever we want to this project, right, so that it's got some features and all these different packages, but I'm not going to do that because it doesn't really matter at this point. We just have an existing project and we want to Dockerize it. So how do we go about doing this? Now we could go through all the tutorials that we want on all the specifics of what files you need, but you could also just go straight to Cookiecutter and basically take all the boilerplate that comes with a generated Cookiecutter project. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a Cookiecutter project here, and we'll basically compare what is given to us in that project and what would then be necessary for us to bring into our project to essentially Dockerize this. So I'm just going to bring up the terminal again, and I'm going to deactivate the virtual environment. I'll then change out of this. So now I'm going to take a look at the documentation. So if we scroll down here, you can go to the read the docs page, which has all the documentation really. And you're going to click on getting up and running locally. And this has all the steps that we need to follow to generate a project using Cookiecutter Django. So first create the virtual environment, activate it, and then install Cookiecutter Django using the Cookiecutter utility and passing in this GitHub, essentially a argument to Cookiecutter, which is telling us to use GitHub, and it's this repository that we're going to use, and then install dependencies, etc. So let's go and create a separate virtual environment for this project. I'll call it the advanced env, and we can then say source advanced env bin and activate. All right, so this is a separate virtual environment from the current project environment because they will have different dependencies. So that's the first step. We then run the Cookiecutter command like so. So I'll come back in, run this, and I've already downloaded it, so I'm not going to re-download it, but you'd want to make sure you're on the latest version. So hit no. And do you want to reuse the existing version? I'm just going to say yes. And so now we get prompted all these questions for how we want our project to be set up. Now I'm going to run through basically all the default answers. So I'm not going to put my own answers except for in one place. So we're going to go through all of them. Description, author name, email, version of the project, MIT license, Windows, I'm going to say no. Use PyCharm is also quite convenient if you are using PyCharm. And then we get to use Docker. So here by default it's no, but I'm going to press Y, which means I do want to use Docker. Select Postgres version, and everything from this point on you can just go with the defaults because it doesn't really matter. You also get an option here for using Django REST framework, which is quite convenient. And use Celery, which is also nice. But you can see there's quite a lot. So everything else is exactly as the defaults. And then we get my awesome project generated from all of that. So I can go and clear this out, and I'll just bring it down a bit. Now there's quite a lot that you can go through in this folder just to understand everything. But really what we're going to take a look at is the Docker configuration. So first we have a compose folder. This compose folder is made up of a local and a production folder, which is basically for the different environments that your project is going to be hosted in or running in. So you have local, which is for the local environment, meaning your dev environment on your local machine, and then the production folder, which would be when you deploy this project, meaning production. So the compose folder is the first thing we need to take note of. We then have a docker ignore file, which essentially is a Docker file to take note of, but it's not extremely important. All it really does is serve exactly the same purpose as a git ignore, which means it tells what files and folders need to be removed from the Docker image, basically. We'll talk more on that in a second. So we have this file. We can then keep going down and we come to a local.yml file. Now this is a very important file. Now this local.yml file is called a compose file. So it's used by one of the Docker services, which is called Docker Compose. And in this file, we configure all of the services that we want in our multi-container application. So basically, this is used to build multiple container applications. So we have a Django service, we have a Postgres service, and we have a docs service. Docs meaning documentation, and really it has to do with the docs folder here, you can see there. We're not going to pay too much attention to that because that's not that important. We're mainly focused on the Django stuff. So we have a Django service and we have a Postgres service. This is also really basic. So if you generated your Cookiecutter project with Celery, then you would have a bunch of other services here as well for Celery, Redis, and I believe Flower as well. So it's a lot more comprehensive, but just to understand the basics, we have these two services really. And so that's the local.yml file. We then keep going down and we have a production.yml file, which is also a Docker Compose file, but due to the naming, you can basically deduce that local.yml is used in your local environment and production.yml is used in your production environment. So they're two different files used in two different environments. And so the production YAML file is a little bit more complicated. You've got a Django service, Postgres service, Trafic, which is basically a reverse proxy and a load balancer, similar to Nginx. And then you've got Redis, which, as I mentioned, is handy if you're using Celery. And then you have AWS CLI as well, so for Amazon Web Services. So these are the Docker services you then get if you are in production. So right now we've got a production YAML, local.yml, a Docker ignore file, and a compose folder. Those are really all the files and folders that we need to be concerned about when it comes to configuring Docker in the Django project. So what I'm going to do just to make this easier to work through is I'm going to move these folders and files into our current project so that we're only working with one project going forward. So I'm going to bring the compose folder, and all of this is going to go into the main current project folder, so not the actual Django settings folder. So we've got compose, we've got Docker ignore. Git ignore would basically be the same, so you could copy that over if you wanted as well. And we're going to grab the local.yml file. Again, this goes into the root of the folder, and the production.yml file as well. So all of that. Right, now those are the Docker configuration folders and files that we needed, but the .envs folder is also going to be necessary, and this is just because it contains environment variables, which is required for the Docker containers to run and is generally better practice as well. So I would grab those and bring that over as well. Okay, so closing everything here. Inside our current project, we have .envs, compose, current project, environment folder, Docker ignore, git ignore, local, and the production YAML files. At this point, if you know anything about Docker and you're able to get a project up and running from this point, then the TLDR is just, these are the files and folders that you need for your configuration. And all you need to do is just change the names and file paths if it doesn't add up with how your project is currently set up. So that would be just going through all the files. Local, we don't need to change. There's nothing that needs to change in terms of file and folder paths. But inside the compose folder, we would need to change some things. If we take a look inside our compose folder, we have local and production. And if we just go into local for now, we have Django and we have docs. I'm not going to take a look at docs because, again, it's not essential right now. But if we go inside the Django folder, we have two files, a Docker file and a start file. Notice there's no extension on that, so it's just like a bash script. So if we start with a Docker file is used to create a set of instructions on how to build an environment that's going to be used basically for your project to run in. But the point is that the environment is exactly the same every single time that it's created. So that means that you could use this on a Windows machine, Mac, Linux, any other operating system that supports Docker. You can run this Docker container, and because it's set up exactly the same way every time, you should expect that your code is being run the same, and hence you shouldn't have any issues of installing it or running the code in different places. So essentially what we're doing here is just defining how this image, because it's basically called an image, is going to be built. So we specify a Python version, which is 3.9 Slim Buster. This is an official Docker image, which is used normally when we want to work with Python. So we're building a Python image, and we can then set arguments. So for example, we're setting a build environment argument, which is set to local. We install our system dependencies. So you can see running apt-get, we're installing a bunch of different dependencies for Python and for scopg2, which is necessary for the database. We then copy over the requirements folder in this case, because in this configuration, we start with a requirements folder. And this is generally better because we split up the dependencies into different environments as well. But for the sake of just keeping it simple, I'm going to change this to requirements.txt so that it's only copying over the one file that we'll work with. And we'll create that file actually right now. So first I'll just deactivate this and I'll change into the current project, activate the virtual environment, and then pip freeze these requirements into requirements.txt. Right, so there's that. So we have Django, and that's it, those little dependencies. And so that is what will then be copied over the requirements.txt file, and we'll later then use that file to install the dependencies. So we're running this command next, which creates Python dependencies and sub-dependency wheels. Now, the one thing here is that it's using the build environment argument here, which is set to local, and we're not going to want to use that over here because we actually can just change this to be requirements.txt. All right, so we're installing that, and then from this point, we set some more arguments and environment variables. We set a working directory, install more dependencies, copy over some folders, run pip install. And from here, we get to some of the more important stuff. So this here is a copy command, and it's copying over the compose production Django entry point file. And it's basically pasting it into this path here, /entry point. So if we take a look at this path here, it's compose production. So it's actually using the production folder, Django, and then entry point. So entry point is a nice little bash script which essentially has our database URL, which is coming from environment variables, and it tries to connect to the database, and it echoes, which is basically like printing to the terminal, waiting for PostgreSQL to become available, and then once it does connect, it says Postgres is available. So that's what this script does, and we're basically just copying it over, and we make sure that it's executable. Then same thing here, we copy over the local Django start command and also make sure that's executable. If we take a look at the start command, it's inside the local Django folder, and this is what we're used to seeing when we work with Django. We have a migrate command, and then there's this runserver plus, which in our case we can actually just change to runserver because we don't have the runserver plus package installed, or the package that gives us that functionality. So we're just going to go with runserver, and then right at the end we copy dot, which means copy everything over, and we set the entry point for the container, which is entry point being this file here. Now, one thing to just note is that entry points and commands. So in Docker, you can run cmd, which means command. Those are two ways of starting the container. Now, the reason we're using entry point here is so that it basically triggers this entry point to be run, but actually the start command is the command that will be used when we start the container, but essentially both of these get run. But this has something to do with the Docker Compose configuration, which we'll take a look at now. So that's what the Compose folder does, right? We have a whole bunch of configuration, which is basically a Docker file and some bash scripts to help us run everything that's necessary for Django when working with Docker. In the local.yml file, we have all these different services. And if we take a look here inside the Django service, there's also a bunch of different arguments, but a lot of them are quite intuitive to understand. So inside build, we have a Docker file, and this points to the specific Docker file that we should be using for this container. So that points to compose local Django Docker file. That's the file we just looked at now, Docker file. And now you can see how everything is linked here. The service points to a Docker file, and that's that Docker file we can find inside the compose folder. You have an image, a container name, what it depends on, volumes, environment files. So here you can see there are two environment files that are loaded inside these paths, right? So inside the environments folder here, you can see the ports, which basically maps port 8000 of the container to port 8000 of the host. So this is important if you actually want to see the project running on your local host. But most important here is the command. So this is what I was saying about you have commands and you have entry points. So the command to actually start this service or this app is /start. So it's going to run that command, which is a script inside the container. And that's the script here. We know it's inside the container or inside the image, because we added it here, /start, right? So it is there, and it's really important to understand because the container is being run actually using Docker Compose. And so that's how everything really pieces together. When it comes to the Postgres side of things, it's actually a little bit simpler. All we have is a Docker file, which is also found inside of here. So production, and then Postgres, and then Docker file. All right, and all this does is just use the latest version of Postgres. So that's a very simple Docker file. And if I just bring this up again, we have image, container name, volumes, and the environment file, which is using the Postgres environment file. And if you're wondering what's in there, it's basically just everything that you need for a Postgres database. The host, port, database, user, and password, and all of this is generated when the project is generated. So it's really convenient. Also, that means the database will be created when all the Docker containers are run. So you don't have to set on your computer the correct Postgres user to have the permissions, which can then create the database. You don't need to do any of that. You just run this and it will spin up the database for you. And that same database, as long as you don't change any credentials, that database will be used going forward, which means all the data will also persist. So you don't have to worry about losing the data every time you switch off Docker or something. And so really that's an overview of how this configuration works. We have a local.yml file, which creates the services that we want. And the services point to the Docker files, which are the images, right? The structures of the environments we want to create. And we can take a look at all of those Docker files and all the corresponding files that are necessary for the container to be run, right? Everything is inside local, and exactly the same thing applies to production. If you want to look at the production services, just come inside here and go to the corresponding Docker file, and you can break down what these services are, what they depend on, what the images look like, and really get a good understanding of everything that's needed to run Django in these Docker containers. So, okay, enough talking about how everything is set up. How can we actually use this now? So if you open up a terminal and you've got Docker installed, then you're going to have Docker Compose installed as well. This comes when you install Docker. And this is a nice utility that you can use to build your images and to run your images as containers. And this command will be used with local and production.yml files. Basically, Docker Compose is used to run multi-container applications. And so the first thing that we need to do is provide the file that we want to work with. So we do this by saying -f and then point it to the file, which in this case is local.yml. And after that, we then provide it with whatever command we want to execute, which in this case, we want to start off with build. And this is going to build the images, right? So it goes through the local.yml file and it builds all those services. So that's going to be the Django service, the Postgres service, and the docs service. So this can take a little bit of time. In our case, and we might need to debug this a little bit, you can see it failed here at the end because of this line. And that's because we actually don't have a docs folder here. So there's a couple different ways that you can handle this. Either you can just remove the docs service here if you don't want it, because you probably don't have a docs folder. So that's what I'm going to do just to make this even simpler. But you could also just copy over the docs folder from here if you did want to include that into your project. And so we can then just go and try this again. We can rebuild the entire image. All right, so there we go. That's completed. And so once we have the images built, we then run docker compose -f local.yml up. And so this will basically just run those images as containers, which means that there'll be actual apps that have been executed and running. Now, when I run this, I get into a little bit of an issue because I already have a Docker container that's in use with that name. So you can see I've got a container name Postgres already being used. So to avoid that, we can just come down here under the Postgres service, and here where we have container name, we can just call this Postgres 2, right? So it has a different container name. Now I'm going to go and do the same thing here for my Django container here, just so I don't have any conflicts. So Django 2 and Postgres 2, but you shouldn't run into this issue. If we then run this command, it'll then start both of those containers, and we can see in this case Docker needs access, so I'll just click OK. And there we go, right? So we can see some stuff is being outputted here. First, we have some Postgres logs, right? So it's actually creating the database, and we can see that that's fine. But as we come down, we can then see here no module named psycopg2, right? So what's happening here? Well, you can see waiting for PostgreSQL to become available. So that's coming from our entry point. So if we just look here at production Django entry point, we can see here that it echoes waiting for Postgres to become available, right? So we're missing the Postgres dependency because Postgres wasn't actually installed. So I'm going to Control-C to stop that. So it'll stop both of those containers, and I'll just close the terminal for now. And we're going to need to add Postgres, or rather psycopg2, as a dependency to our requirements.txt here. And we can grab that dependency from our requirements base, no, our local.txt. So psycopg2, that version there. And I'm just going to grab it and add it to the file here, right? So we absolutely need psycopg2 as a dependency. Now, one thing to note is that once you add a new dependency, you need to rebuild your images. So we need to run that build command again because we have a new dependency and the images are now needing to be updated as well. So you can see here it's running through all the steps again because of that change, right? So that's done. We can try run the containers again with the up command. Great, so we can see all of these logs now, and it seems both of the services were created successfully. We can see the logs here for the Django 2 container, which gives us those recognizable Django logs. Now, even though we can see both these services are running, we still need to configure our Django project to actually connect to the database. So again, I'm going to stop these services. I'll close that. And if we take a look at the generated project, if we go into the config folder, settings, if we take a look at base.py, you can scroll down here and see databases needs to be configured using the environment variable database URL. This also would mean we'd need to start using environment variables in our project. If you're not doing this already, I recommend that you do start doing it because it's just best practice. But it also means that we'll need to install the dependency needed for Environ. And this is the Django Environ package, Django Environ there. So we can actually just grab it and paste it straight into here. And then just coming back here, we'll need to grab some of the configuration. So that's going to be the database's configuration, as well as all of this, as well as the import. Now, the way that it reads the environment variable files will need to possibly change because it depends on the root directory. So we'll just need to see, but copy all of that. And if we head into our current project settings, right here at the top, we'll then put the import. We configure our environment and we read our .env file. We can then cut out the databases and actually go replace this entirely, right? So coming up top, we actually can just replace root_dir with base_dir. So we're basically saying that if we were to create a .env file, it would be inside the root of the project, just like that. This becomes very handy when you want to run the project manually, so not actually using Docker, but it's good to have this configuration anyway, because when it's being used in the Docker container, it is going to need to read the environment variables, which are specified in the .envs folders here. So again, now that we've made some changes and we've added a dependency, we're going to need to build this again, right? Now that we've done that, we run the up command. Now this time we can see something different, which confirms that what we did configured the project correctly, because we can see all the migrations being applied. So because this is the first time the migrations are applied to the correct database, we can see that they're all applied there. Now, even though the project is running and we're not getting any kind of issues, there actually is one issue at this point, and I wanted to include it just so that you could see how easy it is to forget this part. So right now you can see the Django server is running, and if I open it, you can see it doesn't return a response in the browser. And it's very confusing as to why this is happening. But basically, if we head back into our compose folder, it's all inside the start bash script. Whenever we run the server, we can actually specify the port to map this to. And it's important that we do this. That's why earlier on, we actually saw that it had pointing to port 8000 on the local host. And this is important. We need to include it because by doing this, we'll then actually be able to map port 8000 to port 8000 of the host. And we'll actually be able to make requests to the container. So because we've made this change, we're going to rebuild the image. But while we're doing this, we can make one last change to our settings.py, and that's to specify the allowed hosts. So we can take a look at the my awesome project config and then local.py, and we can see all of the allowed hosts. You might as well just copy those and then go and add them into the settings inside the current project so that we absolutely will be able to access on the local host. So we're going to build this again, and once this is finished building, we're then going to run with the up command. All right, we can see here that the URL is actually slightly different. It's on 0.0.0, but it's still localhost. And if you click to bring this into the browser, you can see that it works. And actually, this on the localhost also works as well. So it just refreshed by itself. So now you can see that the Django project has been Dockerized. And at this point, we've made quite a few changes to the current project. We had to install Postgres. We had to install the Django Environ project so that we could work with environment variables. But there's still quite a few things that you need to do if you want to get all the best practices alongside the Dockerizing, because we only have one settings file. We could split that up into a local and a production. We only have one requirements.txt file. We could also split that up into a requirements folder like we saw in this configuration of a Django project. And really you just want to tend towards the setup that is provided in the Cookiecutter Django project. And it's just because it has a lot of the best practices implemented. There'd still be some work to do in terms of improving the configuration here, but overall we have Docker set up, and that was the point of this tutorial, just to show you how you can get Docker configured. Now, even though this video took much longer than 5 minutes, if you're doing this by yourself and you need to Dockerize a project and you don't need to explain it to anybody, then you can actually Dockerize the project relatively quickly just by looking at the configuration from a Cookiecutter Django project. So if you enjoyed this video, then consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. And other than that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.